Kitchens have always been more than places to cook. They're where families gathered, where new gadgets promised to make life easier, and where strange inventions often found a temporary home. Some of these appliances solved real problems, while others were experiments that never quite caught on. In this video, we're revisiting 30 of the weirdest kitchen appliances from the past, devices that once sat proudly on counters, hung from walls, or hid in cupboards, only to disappear as technology and tastes moved on. 1. Ice boxes and block ice delivery. Before refrigerators hummed quietly in kitchens, families relied on the humble icebox to keep food from spoiling. These cabinets, often built from wood and lined with tin or zinc, looked more like a piece of furniture than an appliance. Inside, a compartment held a large block of ice, usually delivered by a milkman or iceman who hauled it straight from his wagon into the home. The cold air from the melting block flowed down into the lower shelves, chilling milk, butter, and meats, enough to give them a few extra days of life. Daily life around an icebox carried its own rhythm. Children grew used to hearing the clatter of tongs as delivery men placed heavy blocks into the top compartment. Homeowners kept drip pans beneath the cabinet to catch water as the ice slowly melted, and forgetting to empty them meant puddles on the floor. It was a routine chore, but one that families accepted as part of keeping food safe. The ice trade created its own network of jobs and social habits. Horses pulling wagons stacked with ice were a familiar sight, and kids sometimes chased after them, hoping for chips of ice to suck on during hot afternoons. Delivery men became fixtures in neighborhoods, remembered for their strength and steady roots. Even the smallest towns had homes depending on those visits, making the Iceman as important to daily living as the postman. For many households, the icebox was a symbol of progress when it first appeared. It represented a shift away from cellars and smokehouses toward a more convenient way of storing perishable goods indoors. The sight of glass milk bottles and cuts of meat sitting behind that cool door gave families a sense of security in their meals. By the 1930s, electric refrigerators began to push iceboxes aside, offering reliable cold without the constant deliveries. Yet memories of the old cabinets remain vivid for those who grew up with them. The heavy doors, the drip pans, the sound of the Iceman's wagon, all of it marks a time when keeping food fresh required effort and community ties. 2. Meat safe, pie safe. Long before freezers or airtight containers, kitchens often had a tall cabinet called a meat safe, sometimes known as a pie safe. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary cupboard, usually made of wood and standing against a wall. What made it different were its sides and doors, which were fitted with fine mesh or perforated tin panels. Those panels allowed air to circulate while keeping flies and other pests away from the food stored inside. Inside, families would place cooked meat, fresh pies, or even jars of milk to help them last longer. The mesh did not cool food the way ice or electricity could, but it slowed down spoilage in climates where warm temperatures threatened to ruin meals quickly. In summer, the meat safe was a lifeline for families who needed to stretch their supplies without wasting what little they had. The designs were often practical, yet decorative. Many pie safes had punched tin doors with patterns of stars, flowers, or simple shapes that doubled as both ventilation and ornament. Some were passed down for generations, their surfaces showing scratches, dents, and faded paint that spoke of years of daily use. To open one was to be greeted by the smell of roasted chicken, a fresh apple pie cooling on a plate, or loaves of bread waiting for the next meal. The meat safe reflected an age when food storage was deeply connected to craftsmanship. Each piece was built by hand, sturdy enough to last decades, and often became part of the kitchen's identity. Children growing up in those homes can still recall lifting the latch and peeking inside for a stolen bite of pie or a slice of leftover ham. It was a shared space where family meals were safeguarded until they were ready to be served. By the mid-20th century, refrigeration replaced the need for these cabinets, but they never fully disappeared. Today, they survive in antique shops, repurposed as rustic furniture, or kept in homes as a reminder of a time when even storing food required thought and care. For many, the meat safe is not just a quirky relic, but a piece of family history tied to the everyday rituals of eating and sharing. Third Hoosier cabinet with built-in flour, sifter, and bin. Step into an early 20th century kitchen, and one piece of furniture often stood out: the Hoosier cabinet. Named after the Indiana companies that first produced them, these cabinets were more than storage. They were designed as a complete kitchen workstation, giving homemakers everything they needed within arm's reach. The most memorable features were the built-in flour bin and metal sifter, tools that turned baking from a messy task into a streamlined routine. The tall cabinet typically had 3 sections. The upper shelves held spices, sugar jars, and cookbooks. The lower half provided drawers for utensils, pans, and linens. In the center sat a pull-out enamel or metal work surface where dough could be kneaded or pies rolled out. On one side, a large bin held pounds of flour. With the twist of a crank, the flour sifted smoothly into a waiting bowl, ready for mixing. This was a major convenience at a time when sifting by hand was slow and tiring. Beyond flour, some Some models came with spice racks, built-in coffee grinders, or labeled glass containers for staples. The cabinet's clever design meant less moving around the kitchen, saving time and effort. For women managing households without modern appliances, the Hoosier felt almost like having a helper by their side. Recipes clipped from newspapers or written by hand often found a home inside its small drawers, creating a personal library of family meals. The cabinet also carried a cultural weight. Advertisements promoted it as a modern solution for the efficient homemaker, and having one became a point of pride. They symbolized progress in the home, offering both function and style with their enamel tops and painted wood. Children often perched nearby, waiting for scraps of dough as their mothers used the sifter to prepare bread or cookies. Fitted kitchen cabinetry and electric appliances replaced the need for standalone Hoosier cabinets, yet many were kept, moved into basements or farmhouses, where they continued to store tools, canned goods, or even hardware. 4. Vacuum siphon coffee maker. Few kitchen appliances looked as dramatic as the vacuum coffee maker, sometimes called a siphon pot. At first glance, it resembled something from a science classroom rather than a kitchen counter. Made of glass chambers stacked one over the other, it brewed coffee using heat, vapor pressure, and vacuum suction. Watching it in action was a show in itself, and many families treated it as much of a centerpiece as a tool. The process began with water in the lower globe. As it heated, steam pushed the water up through a tube into the upper chamber, where ground coffee waited. The mixture bubbled gently while steeping, and when the heat was removed, gravity and vacuum pressure pulled the brewed coffee back down. What remained in the bottom chamber was a rich, smooth drink, often stronger and cleaner than coffee made in percolators. The spent grounds stayed behind in the upper globe, leaving nothing but liquid below. Operating one required patience and care. The glass was fragile, so a steady hand was important when handling it. Cleaning was also more involved than with a percolator or drip machine. Still, many people loved the ritual, enjoying the bubbling sounds, the scent of fresh grounds, and the sight of liquid moving between chambers. For guests, it was part coffee, part performance. Designs varied, with some models using an alcohol burner beneath the globe while others sat on stovetops. A few even had decorative metal frames, making them look more like fine art than cookware. They became popular in the 1930s and 40s, then lingered in homes into the mid-century, before simpler, sturdier machines pushed them aside. Though they required extra effort, vacuum coffee makers offered an experience unmatched by most modern appliances. The flavor was smooth, the brewing was visual, and the device itself drew attention wherever it appeared. Today, they are prized by collectors and coffee enthusiasts who see them as a link to a slower, more hands-on era of brewing. For many who grew up with one, the memory of that bubbling glass globe is tied as much to family mornings as the taste of the coffee itself. 5. Stovetop coffee percolator. Before drip machines and pods filled countertops, the stovetop percolator ruled the morning routine. Its design was simple but clever: a tall metal pot with a basket inside that held the grounds, and a hollow tube that carried boiling water up and over them. As the water bubbled, it cycled through again and again, producing a coffee that was bold, aromatic, and unmistakably tied to mid-century kitchens. For many families, the sound of a percolator was part of waking up. The gentle gurgling from the stovetop meant the day was beginning, while the aroma spread through the house, pulling everyone out of bed. Glass knobs on the lids let you watch the brew as it darkened, a little window into how strong the coffee was getting. Timing mattered. Too long, and the drink turned bitter. Too short, and it tasted weak. Learning the balance was almost a rite of passage for anyone who wanted to make a satisfying pot. The percolator was durable, often made of aluminum or stainless steel, and it could handle years of daily use. Some went camping trips, placed directly over campfires, while others lived on stovetops, dented and darkened with age. Guests arriving at a neighbor's home were often welcomed with a cup poured straight from one, served in heavy mugs that matched the rugged charm of the pot itself. Though it required more attention than modern drip machines, the percolator gave coffee a strong, full-bodied flavor that many people still remember fondly. The bubbling sound, combined with the scent, created an atmosphere of comfort. It was less about convenience and more about routine, and households shaped their mornings around it. In the 1970s, automatic drip machines took over, offering consistency with less effort. Still, stovetop percolators never fully disappeared. Some remained tucked in cupboards, brought out for nostalgia or outdoor use. 6. Jello molds and gelatin molds. Few dishes define the mid-century kitchen table like a brightly colored Jello mold. These creations combined gelatin with fruit, vegetables, or even meats, and were shaped in decorative tins or plastic molds. The results ranged from dazzling to downright odd, but they always caught attention. At potlucks and family gatherings, no dessert table seemed complete without one wobbling centerpiece. The molds themselves came in endless shapes: rings, domes, flowers, and seasonal designs for holidays. Housewives flipped through magazines or cookbooks for inspiration, experimenting with layers of flavors and colors. One layer might hold canned pineapple, while another was filled with whipped topping or cream cheese. Some recipes went further, suspending olives, celery, or shredded carrots in the gelatin. The combinations often reflected a mix of creativity and curiosity, showing how flexible gelatin could be as both a sweet and savory medium. Preparing one took time and patience. Each layer had to set before the next was poured in, and flipping the mold onto a plate without breaking it demanded a steady hand. When successful, the result was both decorative and edible, gleaming like stained glass under kitchen lights. For children, these desserts were fun to poke, jiggle, and taste, adding a sense of play to mealtime. For adults, they carried pride, proving a hostess's skill in the kitchen. The popularity of Jell-O molds reached its peak during the 1950s and 60s, supported by advertising campaigns that promoted gelatin as modern and versatile. They became symbols of celebration, often appearing at holidays, church socials, or birthday parties. Some recipes bordered on the bizarre, but even the strangest combinations had a place in the culture of the time. Back then, tastes shifted, and molded gelatin dishes lost their spotlight, yet many people still recall them vividly, whether with fondness or amusement. The molds now survive as retro collectibles, displayed on kitchen walls or in vintage shops. More than food, they represented a style of entertaining that valued presentation as much as flavor. 7. Butter molds and butter stamps. Before sticks of butter wrapped in paper became the norm, many households shaped their butter with special molds or stamped designs into it for a touch of charm. A butter mold was usually made of wood or ceramic, crafted with a cavity in the shape of flowers, animals, or simple patterns. Soft butter was pressed inside, chilled until firm, and then released to reveal a decorated block ready for the table. Butter stamps worked in a similar way, pressing patterns onto the surface for an instant design. These little touches turned something ordinary into something memorable. At holiday dinners, a cow or lamb-shaped block of butter might sit beside the bread basket. For Sunday meals, flowers or stars impressed into the top of a round pat were enough to make the spread feel special. In rural communities, molds also served a practical purpose. They standardized size and weight, making it easier to sell homemade butter at markets. Customers knew exactly what they were getting, and farmers added a recognizable mark that set their butter apart. The designs themselves reflected creativity and tradition. Some molds featured detailed carvings, passed down through families as heirlooms. Others were simple, focusing on functionality more than flair. Either way, the act of preparing butter in this way was a quiet ritual that connected the kitchen to both art and necessity. Children often watched with fascination as their mothers or grandmothers packed the soft butter in tightly, eager for the reveal of the final shape. Over time, industrial packaging made the practice unnecessary. Supermarkets offered uniform sticks, and few people had reason to decorate their butter anymore. Still, the molds and stamps survived in cupboards, attics, and antique shops. Today, they are collected not only for their beauty, but also for the history they carry. They remind us of a period when homemakers took pride in details, finding joy in presenting even the simplest foods with care. To look at one today is to imagine a table set decades ago, where butter was more than a condiment. It was part of the presentation, reflecting the effort, pride, and tradition woven into everyday family meals. 8. Wall-mounted can opener. In the mid-20th century, convenience in the kitchen often meant clever tools built right into the space. One such gadget was the wall-mounted can opener. Unlike the small handheld versions most people are familiar with today, this one stayed fixed to the wall, usually near the counter where canned goods were prepared. It freed up drawer space, was always easy to find, and had the strength to handle thick metal lids without slipping. The design was simple but effective. A sturdy arm with a cutting wheel and crank was anchored to a metal base screwed directly into the wall, or sometimes a cabinet. To use it, a can was positioned against the wheel, the handle turned, and the lid was sliced open cleanly. The leverage from its mounted position made it easier than struggling with a handheld opener, especially on large or heavy cans. For families who relied on canned vegetables, fruits, and soups, it quickly became a reliable tool. What set these openers apart was their permanence. They became a small but steady presence in the kitchen, always visible and ready for use. Unlike drawer gadgets that could get misplaced, a wall-mounted opener was part of the landscape. Guests might even remember it hanging beside the spice rack or under the cabinets, a tiny detail that spoke to the era's focus on practicality. Of course, the trade-off was flexibility. Once installed, it could not move, and some homeowners grew tired of the industrial look. As handheld models became lighter, cheaper, and easier to store, the mounted style faded from popularity. Yet for many, the memory of turning that crank while listening to the metal lid pop free remains strong. Today, vintage wall-mounted openers are often found in antique stores or in older kitchens that never got rid of them. Collectors value their durability, and some people still keep them in working order for the nostalgia and the convenience. More than a can opener, it represented a time when household gadgets were built to last, installed with the expectation that they would serve faithfully for decades. 9. Pull-down ironing board. Before portable ironing boards became standard in closets and laundry rooms, many households relied on pull-down ironing boards built right into the walls or kitchen cabinetry. These boards folded up neatly when not in use and dropped down with a quick tug whenever clothes needed pressing. For families in smaller homes or apartments, saving space was essential, and this design provided a practical solution without sacrificing function. The setup was surprisingly sturdy. Hinges held the board in place, and once lowered, it locked into a horizontal position, ready for use. Homemakers appreciated how quickly it could be prepared, especially during busy mornings when shirts and dresses needed attention. When the task was done, the board folded away, hidden behind a slim cabinet door or panel. It made ironing less of a production, blending smoothly into the kitchen or utility area until needed again. These built-in boards also reflected an era when efficiency and tidiness were prized. Kitchens in the mid-century often doubled as workspaces beyond cooking, and ironing was considered part of daily household upkeep. Children might sit at the table doing homework while a parent presses clothes just a few feet away, the warm smell of fabric and steam filling the room. The board became a quiet part of family routine, almost invisible in memory, yet firmly tied to the rhythm of home life. As lifestyles shifted and houses grew larger, portable ironing boards took over. They could be stored anywhere, moved between rooms, and adjusted to different heights. The fixed pull-down versions slowly disappeared from new builds, though some can still be found in older houses, tucked behind tall, narrow doors in kitchens or hallways. 10. Wringer washer. Long before automatic washing machines became common, the wringer washer was a familiar sight in many kitchens and back rooms. These machines had a large round tub with an agitator for washing and a set of rollers mounted on top to squeeze out excess water. Clothes were fed carefully through the rollers, which pressed out water with a firm grip before they were hung on the line to dry. It was slower and more labor-intensive than what we know today, but at the time, it felt like a major step up from scrubbing by hand on a washboard. The process demanded attention. If a shirt or towel wasn't fed evenly, it could twist and bunch, sometimes pulling fingers or buttons too close to the rollers. Many children of the era can recall being warned to keep their hands away, since accidents were not uncommon. Despite the risks, the machine saved hours of backbreaking work, especially when compared to hauling buckets and scrubbing clothes outdoors. Wringer washers were also adaptable. Some families used them right in the kitchen, where plumbing was accessible, while others rolled them outside to hook up with a garden hose. They could handle not only clothes, but also heavy linens, rugs, and blankets, which would have been nearly impossible to wash effectively by hand. The sound of the agitator churning away, followed by the rhythmic squeak of the rollers, became part of the household routine on wash day. Over time, manufacturers introduced safety features and eventually replaced the rollers with spin cycles, leading to the modern washing machine. The wringer washer faded from new homes, but its legacy lived on in the memories of families who used them weekly. For many, it represents an era when chores were physical, requiring patience and care, but rewarding households with freshly cleaned laundry that carried the scent of open air once hung to dry. 11. Meat grinder. Before packages of ground beef and pre-made sausage became grocery staples, many households relied on their own meat grinders. These sturdy tools clamped onto the edge of a kitchen counter or table, ready to process cuts of meat into fresh ground portions. Turning the crank fed the meat through a chamber lined with sharp blades and a perforated plate, producing consistent results for hamburgers, meatballs, or homemade sausages. It was straightforward, but it gave families confidence that they knew exactly what was in their food. The grinder also encouraged resourcefulness. Scraps of meat that might otherwise go to waste could be repurposed into fillings for casseroles, pies, or hearty stews. Some families even used the device for more than meat, pushing vegetables, nuts, or bread through for recipes that called for fine chopping. It was durable, multi-purpose, and made to last for decades, often handed down from one generation to the next. Using the grinder was a hands-on process. Kids often helped turn the crank while parents fed in the ingredients, making meal preparation a small family event. The heavy feel of the tool, its metal body, and steady rhythm made it distinct from today's electric processors. Cleaning it afterward took effort, as each part had to be disassembled and scrubbed, but that too became part of the ritual of cooking from scratch. The rise of supermarkets gradually changed the need for home grinding. By the mid-century, ready-to-use ground meats were widely available and affordable, reducing the demand for manual grinders. Still, many cooks preferred the taste and texture of freshly ground food, and some enthusiasts keep them in use even today for homemade specialties. Now, vintage grinders are often spotted in antique shops or displayed as rustic kitchen decor. They symbolize a time when preparing meals involved more personal effort effort and more direct contact with the ingredients. Beyond their practical function, they carry stories of family kitchens, weekend meals, and recipes that blended tradition with ingenuity. 12. Metal ice cube trays. Long before plastic trays took over freezer shelves, households chilled their drinks with metal ice cube trays. Made from aluminum, these trays were sturdy, cold to the touch, and designed with a clever lever system. After filling each compartment with water and sliding the tray into the freezer, you'd wait for the cubes to harden. Once frozen, the real challenge began, freeing the cubes. That's where the lever came in. Pulling it back lifted and twisted the metal dividers, cracking the ice loose with a satisfying snap that echoed through the kitchen. For many, this was a daily ritual. On hot afternoons, kids would run to the freezer, wrestle with the stiff lever, and then watch cubes tumble out, often flying across the counter in the process. The trays were tough and dependable, but they demanded a little muscle. Sometimes the lever would stick, sometimes the cubes would cling stubbornly, and other times the tray itself froze to your fingers. These quirks made them frustrating, but they also gave the tool character. The design had a practical edge too. Unlike flimsy plastics that could warp or crack, metal trays lasted for years. They kept drinks refreshingly cold at family dinners, holiday parties, and summer barbecues. Guests often recalled the sound of the lever and the metallic clatter of cubes dropping into tall glasses of soda or iced tea. It was a small but memorable piece of kitchen life. Eventually, the convenience of flexible plastic trays and automatic ice makers in refrigerators made the metal version less common. People traded the stubborn lever for an easier twist or, later, a dispenser built right into the door. Even so, metal trays have never completely vanished. Collectors and nostalgic homeowners still appreciate their durability and the old-fashioned feel they bring. 13. Bread boxes. For much of the 20th century, a bread box was as common on the kitchen counter as a toaster or kettle. These boxes, often made of wood, metal, or enamel, were designed with a simple goal: keep bread fresh for as long as possible in the days before preservatives and airtight plastic bags. The lid was usually loose enough to allow air circulation, which helped prevent mold, but still tight enough to slow down staleness. Every family seemed to have one, and they were more than storage. A bread box was a symbol of daily life. Freshly baked loaves, store-bought rolls, or grandma's biscuits would find a place inside, waiting for breakfast or after-school snacks. Children grew up knowing exactly where to look when they wanted a quick slice spread with butter and jam. Some bread boxes even had a warm smell of flour and yeast lingering inside, a quiet reminder of the comfort they held. Designs varied widely. Some were large wooden boxes with roll-top covers that slid open smoothly, while others were compact tins painted in pastel colors or decorated with floral patterns. In some homes, the bread box matched other kitchenware, forming part of a coordinated set. Its presence on the counter made kitchens feel orderly, with bread kept safe from pests or curious pets. Families had small rituals around them. Dad might lift the lid each morning to grab bread for his sandwiches, while kids peeked in after school for leftover rolls. It wasn't just about storage. It was part of the rhythm of meals. The bread box was reliable, quietly serving its purpose every single day. As factory bread with preservatives became standard and plastic wrapping took over, the need for bread boxes diminished. Many households packed them away, and new kitchens rarely made room for one. Yet they still carry a certain charm. Vintage bread boxes are sought after for their retro appeal, often repurposed as decorative pieces or used by those who bake at home. They recall a time when food wasn't meant to last weeks on a shelf, but was enjoyed fresh and simple, with a little help from a sturdy box on the counter. 14. Samovar tea urn for all-day hot water. In many kitchens of the past, especially in homes influenced by European traditions, the samovar tea urn was more than a utility. It was a centerpiece of social life. A samovar is a tall metal vessel, often made of brass, copper, or nickel-plated steel, designed to keep water hot throughout the day. Its purpose was simple, but its presence carried weight, symbolizing warmth, hospitality, and the comfort of endless cups of tea. The design usually featured a central chimney or tube running down the middle, where charcoal or wood coals provided heat. Water surrounded the chimney, staying warm for hours, sometimes even the entire day. A spigot at the bottom made serving easy, and families could pour directly into teapots or mugs without reheating a kettle again and again. Later versions used electricity instead of solid fuel, but the ritual of gathering around the samovar remained the same. What made these urns special was their role in conversation. Guests sitting at a table might linger longer because the tea kept flowing. A child returning home from school could expect a warm drink waiting, poured effortlessly from the shiny tap. For households in colder regions, the constant supply of hot water was as practical as it was comforting. It eliminated the repeated chore of boiling kettles, freeing time for other tasks. Samovars came in many styles, from plain utilitarian models to ornate pieces decorated with engravings and polished surfaces. Some families treated them as heirlooms, passing them down through generations, while others saw them as everyday tools worn by years of use. Either way, the combination of function and beauty made them stand out among the kitchen appliances of the time. As modern electric kettles grew popular, the need for a large urn diminished. Families no longer required gallons of hot water standing ready, and kitchens shrank in size, leaving little space for bulky metal vessels. 15. Soda siphon or gasogene for fizzy water at home. Long before plastic bottles of soda lined every store shelf, families made their own sparkling water with soda siphons or gasogenes. These devices were part science experiment, part kitchen tool, and they brought a little showmanship to the table. At the heart of the process was carbon dioxide, captured and forced into plain water to create bubbles. The result was a fizzy drink that could be sipped on its own or mixed with flavored syrups for a homemade treat. The soda siphon was the more common style by the mid-20th century. It looked like a metal or glass bottle with a nozzle on top, sometimes covered with a protective mesh. You filled it with cold water, screwed in a small CO2 cartridge, and released the gas with a satisfying hiss. With a quick press of the lever, sparkling water poured into a glass, complete with foam and fizz. It was elegant enough to sit on dinner tables and practical enough for everyday use. The gasogene was an earlier version, more elaborate, and often made of heavy glass with brass fittings. It worked by generating gas in one chamber and forcing it into the water in another. Using one required a steady hand and a sense of timing, which gave the process a certain drama. Guests might gather to watch the bubbles form, turning a simple refreshment into a miniature performance. For families, these gadgets represented a bit of luxury. Sparkling water was associated with cafes and hotels, so having it at home felt special. Children loved the fizz on their tongues, while adults mixed the water with fruit cordials or used it in cocktails. The sound of the siphon releasing its spray became part of gatherings, often followed by laughter and clinking glasses. As bottled sodas became cheap and widely available, the use of home siphons declined. Supermarkets made it easier to grab a six-pack than to recharge cartridges or handle delicate glassware. Still, soda siphons never entirely vanished. Collectors prized the colorful mesh-covered versions, and some cocktail enthusiasts still use them today for authenticity. 16. Spindle milkshake mixer, soda fountain style. Walk into a diner in the mid-20th century, and you'd likely hear the steady hum of a spindle milkshake mixer working away behind the counter. These machines, tall and sturdy with a motor at the top and a metal spindle reaching down, were the backbone of every soda fountain. They were built for one purpose: to whip together ice cream, milk, and syrup into the thick shakes that defined the era. The process was simple but captivating. A tall stainless steel cup was filled with ingredients and clipped onto the mixer. With the flick of a switch, the spindle spun rapidly, blending everything into a creamy consistency that no spoon could achieve on its own. The sound of the motor combined with the clink of the cup against the housing created a rhythm that became part of the atmosphere of diners and drugstore counters. Customers sitting on stools could watch their shakes being made, anticipation growing as the cup frosted over from the chill. Children especially loved these moments. Ordering a chocolate or strawberry shake wasn't just about the taste, it was about the experience of watching the mixer work. The tall glass that arrived, often with whipped cream and a cherry on top, felt like a reward. Sometimes the server even poured the extra mix from the cup into a small side glass, a little bonus that made the treat unforgettable. These mixers were designed for durability. Many had multiple spindles, allowing soda jerks to make several shakes at once during busy afternoons. The machines became symbols of efficiency and style, with polished chrome finishes that matched the gleaming counters they sat on. They were practical, but they also contributed to the lively image of the soda fountain as a social hub. 17th hand-cranked egg beater. Before electric mixers claimed their permanent place on kitchen counters, the hand-cranked egg beater was a trusted tool in nearly every household. Its design was straightforward, a handle connected to a set of rotating beaters, powered by turning a side crank. The gears translated each turn into rapid spins, whipping air into eggs, cream, or batters with surprising efficiency. For many children, helping in the kitchen meant gripping the wooden or metal handle of one of these gadgets. The crank required rhythm, and getting the beaters moving smoothly was almost like learning a skill. The whirring blades made a distinct sound as they spun through the mixture, a noise that became part of family kitchens long before the hum of electric mixers. Practicality was the reason for its popularity. It was faster than a whisk, easier to clean than bulkier tools, and needed no electricity. Whipped cream, meringues, or scrambled eggs could be prepared in minutes, making it invaluable for daily meals and special occasions alike. The egg beater was often compact enough to store in a drawer, always ready when needed. The craftsmanship of these tools also stood out. Early models had cast iron frames and wooden handles, built to last for years. Later versions used lighter metals and enamel finishes, sometimes with decorative touches. Some even became family heirlooms, kept long after they were replaced by modern mixers, because of the memories tied to them. Parents could recall teaching their children to turn the crank, while children remembered sneaking tastes of sweet batters straight from the bowl. With the rise of electric hand mixers in the mid-20th century, the hand crank version began to fade. Convenience and speed won out, and fewer families wanted to spend time manually beating ingredients. Yet the old egg beaters never completely disappeared. Many remain in antique shops or tucked into kitchen drawers, still in working order, a reminder of how simple tools shape daily cooking. 18. Toast-O-Later Conveyor Toaster. Among the most eye-catching gadgets of the mid-century kitchen was the Toast-O-Later, a toaster that looked more like a miniature assembly line than a countertop appliance. Instead of popping bread up from slots, this device slowly carried each slice along a moving track past glowing heating elements, delivering it browned and ready at the other end. Watching it in action was half the fun, and for many families, it turned an ordinary breakfast into a small performance. The machine worked with a conveyor belt system hidden inside the sleek metal body. A slice of bread was placed upright at the entrance slot, and with a soft hum, the mechanism drew it in. Through small viewing windows, you could glimpse the toast moving steadily along, gradually turning golden as it approached the exit. When it finally emerged, perfectly crisped, it felt like a little prize being handed over by the machine. Children often gathered around the toaster just to watch, fascinated by the slow journey of their bread. Parents liked the consistency, since every slice came out evenly browned, avoiding the half-burnt, half-white results common in cheaper toasters of the time. The Toast-O-Later wasn't just practical, it was entertaining, and it quickly became a conversation piece in any kitchen that had one. Its design also reflected the era's fascination with automation. The mid-20th century was full of inventions that promised to bring factory efficiency into the home, and the Toast-O-Later fit right in with that spirit. Advertisements emphasized its novelty, showing it as a modern upgrade from ordinary toasters, a symbol of progress as much as a breakfast tool. However, the uniqueness that made it exciting also limited its popularity. The device was bulky, more expensive than standard toasters, and slower for large families who wanted multiple slices at once. As traditional pop-up models improved, the conveyor-style toaster lost ground. 19. Open flame toaster racks for gas burners. Before electric toasters became affordable for every household, many kitchens relied on simple wire racks designed to toast bread directly over an open flame. These devices were nothing more than angled frames, often made of chrome or nickel-plated steel, that balanced slices at just the right distance above a gas burner or open fire. They had no moving parts, no switches, and no guarantees, just heat, patience, and the watchful eye of whoever stood nearby. Using one demanded attention. The bread could go from pale to perfectly golden in seconds, and just as quickly, from golden to charred, if you turned away. Families developed tricks for rotating slices, flipping them to get even browning on both sides. The process was hands-on, with the smell of toasting bread filling the kitchen long before the slice reached the table. For many children, the memory of leaning close to the stove and waiting for a turn with the rack is tied to mornings at home. These racks were inexpensive, which made them popular during the early and mid-20th century. Their compact design allowed them to tuck into drawers when not in use, and they worked not only for bread, but also for heating rolls or bagels. Some models even fold flat, a clever feature for storage in small kitchens. In rural areas without electricity, they remained in use long after electric toasters were introduced, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions worked best. Of course, there were drawbacks. Uneven heat from burners often left one side crisp while the other stayed soft. Flames could blacken the edges if the rack sat too low, and children had to be kept at a safe distance. Still, the ritual of turning bread over a flame carried its own charm. It made breakfast feel more involved, as if every slice required a little care before reaching the plate. 20. Cast iron stovetop waffle irons with detachable plates. Long before plug-in waffle makers made weekend breakfast easy, kitchens used heavy cast iron waffle irons that sat right on top of the stove. These devices looked like two thick plates connected by hinges, with long handles that allowed the cook to flip them back and forth over a flame. The plates were embossed with deep grids that shaped batter into crisp golden waffles. Some models even had detachable plates, which made cleaning easier and allowed families to swap in different pattern designs. Cooking required patience and skill. The iron had to be preheated evenly, so the batter would cook without sticking. Too hot, and the waffle burned before the center cooked through. Too cool, and the batter clung stubbornly to the grooves. Cooks learned to test the surface with drops of water, waiting for the right sizzle before pouring in the mix. Once closed and flipped, the iron filled the kitchen with the smell of toasted batter, a scent that instantly drew children to the table. These irons were built to last. Made of solid metal, they could endure decades of use, and many were passed down through families as heirlooms. Some had decorative patterns, leaving waffles with floral or geometric designs that made breakfast feel festive. Detachable plates made them more versatile, doubling as grills for sandwiches or thin cookies, depending on the design chosen. They were also a link to simpler times. Preparing waffles was not just a quick chore, but an event. Families gathered around the stove, waiting their turn, as the cook flipped the heavy handles with a practiced motion. Serving them fresh off the iron gave the meal a sense of warmth that store-bought frozen waffles could never match. 21st. Pitzel and Krumkake irons for patterned cookies. Some of the most beautiful kitchen tools of the past were the irons made for delicate cookies, like Pitzel in Italy or Krumkake in Scandinavia. These irons were usually made of cast iron or heavy aluminum, with two flat plates joined by hinges and embossed with ornate designs, flowers, spirals, or geometric patterns. When batter was poured in and the plates were pressed together over a stovetop flame, the cookie came out thin, crisp, and decorated with an intricate pattern that looked almost too pretty to eat. The process was both simple and ritualistic. A spoonful of batter was placed in the center of the hot iron, the plates clamped shut, and a few seconds later, the wafer-thin cookie was ready to peel out. Some families rolled them while warm, shaping Krumkake into cones that could later be filled with cream. Others left them flat, stacking Pitzel into neat piles that were brought out at weddings, holidays, and special Sunday gatherings. The designs varied by region and manufacturer, and each iron carried its own personality, almost like a signature of the household. Using one wasn't quick. Each cookie had to be made one at a time, and keeping the iron at the right temperature was key to avoiding burnt edges or soggy centers. For many families, though, the time spent standing at the stove was part of the tradition. Children often hovered nearby, waiting for the first warm cookie off the press, while grandparents told stories as they worked through dozens of rounds for a holiday tray. These irons connected food with artistry. The patterns imprinted into every cookie weren't just decoration. They symbolized the pride and care that went into homemade treats. Over the years, families grew attached to their particular designs, passing the irons down as heirlooms. Opening an old kitchen drawer and finding one meant uncovering a direct link to generations before. Electric Pitzel makers eventually appeared, promising speed and consistency. But many still prefer the old stovetop irons for their charm and authenticity. They carry the weight of tradition, the smell of vanilla or cardamom, and the quiet joy of cookies that look like lace. Few kitchen gadgets combine function and beauty as seamlessly as these patterned irons. 22nd hand crank butter churns. Before supermarkets stocked neat paper-wrapped sticks of butter, families often made their own with the help of a butter churn. One of the most common types was the hand crank churn, a tall glass or wooden container with a paddle inside, powered by a handle on the lid. Cream was poured in, the crank was turned steadily, and after a while, the liquid separated into buttermilk and golden lumps of butter. It was slow work, but the moment the butter finally formed felt like magic to anyone watching. Churning was both a chore and a small celebration. Children were often given the job of turning the crank, partly to keep them busy, and partly because their energy was useful. The rhythmic creak of the handle became familiar in farm kitchens, and the sight of fresh butter forming was satisfying after the effort it took. The end result was not just butter, but a deeper connection to the food, since the process showed exactly how simple cream could be transformed with nothing more than motion and patience. The churn itself was designed to last. Glass jars made it easy to see the progress inside, while wooden or ceramic versions were sturdier and often decorated. Some had simple cross-shaped paddles, while others used more elaborate blades that cut through cream more efficiently. Many became family heirlooms, kept long after store-bought butter replaced the need for homemade. Fresh butter made this way had a taste and texture that people still remember fondly. It was rich, smooth, and slightly sweet, especially when spread over warm bread or biscuits straight from the oven. The leftover buttermilk wasn't wasted either. It went into pancakes, biscuits, or was drunk as a tangy refreshment. Nothing about the process was wasted, and that practicality gave the churn its value. 23rd hand crank cream separator. On farms and in rural kitchens, fresh milk was more than a drink. It was the base for butter, cream, and cheese. And one gadget made all of that easier: the hand crank cream separator. This tall mechanical device looked a little intimidating, with its spinning bowl, spouts, and handles, but its job was simple. It separated the thick cream from the thinner skim milk by using centrifugal force. With a steady turn of the crank, whole milk was poured in at the top, spun rapidly inside, and then released through two different spouts, one stream of rich cream and another of skim. For families with a cow or two, the separator was invaluable. Instead of waiting for cream to rise naturally in a pan, which took hours and often led to waste, this machine made the process quick and efficient. Cream could be collected right away for butter and whipped toppings, while the skim milk was used for cooking or fed to animals. Nothing went to waste, and the household gained more control over how milk was used. The design was clever. Many models were made of metal and clamped firmly to a table or stand. The crank was heavy and required steady effort, so it often became a shared chore, with children taking turns at the handle. The sound of the spinning bowl, the rhythm of the crank, and the streams of liquid filling separate containers created a kitchen scene that was both practical and memorable. Learning to use the separator was almost a skill of its own. It had to be cleaned thoroughly after each use, with its many small parts washed and dried to avoid sour milk residue. Families treated it carefully, because a good separator was an investment expected to last for decades. Some even had decorative flourishes, showing that manufacturers understood these were not just tools, but centerpieces of farm kitchens. 24. Apple peeler corer slicer cranks. In many kitchens of the past, autumn meant baskets of apples waiting to be turned into pies, sauces, or preserves. To make that work less tedious, families turned to the apple peeler corer slicer, a hand-cranked gadget that clamped right onto the edge of a table. At first glance, it looked like a curious mix of gears, blades, and spikes, but once put to use, it could transform a pile of apples in minutes. The process began by skewering an apple onto the sharp prongs of the machine. With one steady turn of the crank, the apple spun against a small blade that neatly peeled away the skin. As the crank continued, another blade cored the apple while a spiral slicer cut it into even rings. In just a few turns, a whole apple was ready for baking, drying, or snacking. What might have taken several minutes by hand was reduced to seconds, making it a favorite during harvest season when families processed bushels at a time. These devices weren't just practical, they were also built to last. Most were made of cast iron, often painted in bold colors, with sturdy clamps that secured them firmly to a counter. The clicking sound of gears and the squeak of the crank were familiar in farm kitchens, especially during late summer when preserving food for winter was essential. Children often helped with the cranking, turning a chore into a family activity. Watching the peels fall away in long curls was oddly satisfying, and many kids nibbled on the ribbons of skin as they worked. The apple peeler corer slicer became more than a tool. It represented efficiency at a time when every minute of labor counted. Homemakers valued how quickly it produced uniform slices, perfect for pies that baked evenly or dried apples that stored well. As packaged Apple products and electric gadgets grew more common, these hand crank models lost ground. Yet they never disappeared completely. Modern reproductions are still sold today for people who enjoy traditional cooking or want to prepare large batches the old-fashioned way. Antique originals, with their ornate castings and time-worn handles, remain prized by collectors. 25. Cherry pitters, single and multi-pit styles. Summertime kitchens are often filled with the sight and scent of bright red cherries, but preparing them for pies, jams, or preserves was never easy. That's where cherry pitters came in, clever little gadgets that saved homemakers from hours of tedious work. These tools came in two main varieties: single pit models that handled one cherry at a time, and multi-pit designs that could process several in one go. The single pitter was usually a small handheld device. You placed a cherry in a small cup or slot, pressed down a plunger, and out popped the pit, leaving the fruit intact. It was simple, reliable, and small enough to tuck into a drawer when not in use. The multi-pit style was larger, often sitting on the counter like a miniature press. A tray held several cherries at once, and when the lever came down, metal rods or blades pushed through them, ejecting the stones in one motion. These were especially handy for families who preserved large amounts of fruit during harvest season. Both styles had their quirks. Single pitters required patience if you had baskets of cherries to work through, while multi-pitters could sometimes crush fruit or splatter juice if not used carefully. Still, compared to removing pits by hand with a knife or hairpin, they felt like lifesavers. Kitchens during the cherry season would hum with activity as families worked together, red juice staining fingers and tabletops, while jars filled with fruit destined for pies, cordials, or preserves. Designers gave these gadgets a sturdy build, often with cast metal parts and wooden handles. Their durability meant they lasted through years of use, passed along with family recipes that depended on cherries prepared just so. Kids often helped, enjoying the rhythmic pressing motion, even if they made a mess in the process. 26. Rotary food mill / moule grater. The rotary food mill, sometimes called the moule grater after a French brand that popularized it, was a staple in many mid-century kitchens. At first glance, it looked like a simple bowl with a handle and a crank, but its design solved a lot of small but important kitchen tasks. Inside, a flat blade pressed food through a perforated plate as the handle was turned. The result was a smooth, even puree or finely grated ingredient, all without electricity. Families relied on the food mill for soups, sauces, and mashed vegetables. It was perfect for making silky tomato sauce, since the skins and seeds stayed behind while the pulp slipped through. Parents of young children used it to make baby food before jars of pureed carrots or peas were sold in stores. Home cooks reached for it when recipes called for smooth mashed potatoes or applesauce, enjoying the control it gave over texture. Unlike blenders, it didn't whip air into the food, and unlike sieves, it didn't demand endless pressing with a spoon. The Moule brand became especially known for its smaller versions meant for cheese and nuts. These compact graters clipped over a bowl or plate, letting the user turn a crank to shred parmesan, almonds, or even chocolate with minimal effort. They were durable and quick, often pulled out during family dinners to grate cheese right at the table. Their versatility made them a favorite in both everyday cooking and special meals. Cleaning the food mill took some patience, as pulp often clung to the perforated discs, but households accepted that as part of cooking from scratch. The discs were usually interchangeable, allowing for fine, medium, or coarse results depending on the dish. Many families kept them stored neatly with the rest of their kitchen tools, ready to be brought out whenever something needed to be smoothed or grated. As electric processors became affordable, the rotary food mill fell out of daily use. Still, chefs and home cooks who value traditional methods continue to swear by them, insisting that no blender can replicate the texture they produce. 27. Clamp-on meat grinder / mincer. Before grocery stores stocked neatly packaged ground beef, families took matters into their own hands with clamp-on meat grinders. These heavy-duty gadgets were built from cast iron or steel and secured directly to the edge of a counter or kitchen table. Once clamped into place, they became a small but mighty workhorse. Meat was fed into the top, turned by hand with a sturdy crank, and forced through sharp blades against a perforated plate. Outcome: fresh ground meat, ready for patties, meatballs, or sausages. The beauty of these grinders was in their control. Housewives and butchers alike could decide exactly what cuts of meat to use, ensuring nothing went to waste. Tougher or cheaper cuts were given new life, and scraps could be transformed into hearty meals. Some cooks even used them for vegetables, breadcrumbs, or nuts, proving how versatile the tool really was. Recipes often assumed you had a grinder at home, making it almost as essential as a stove or kettle. The process wasn't glamorous, but it was satisfying. Children sometimes stood beside a parent, cranking the handle while watching ribbons of meat curl out the front. The sound of metal turning against metal became familiar, along with the rhythm of stopping to scrape out the results into a bowl. Cleaning the grinder required disassembling each piece and scrubbing carefully, but many considered it worth the effort for the taste and freshness. Durability was another hallmark. These grinders were designed to last for decades, often handed down from one generation to the next. You can still find them today in antique shops, often with their patina intact and sometimes still in working order. Unlike flimsy plastic gadgets, these were tools that embodied permanence. With the rise of electric grinders and prepackaged ground meats, clamp-on models slowly left kitchens, but they remain prized by hunters, homesteaders, and traditional cooks who appreciate knowing exactly what goes into their food. More than a gadget, the clamp-on grinder was part of a larger culture of self-sufficiency, where preparing meals meant rolling up your sleeves and putting real effort into what went on the family table. 28. Sausage stuffer funnels and presses. Homemade sausage might sound like a novelty today, but for many kitchens of the past, it was a regular practice. Sausage stuffers, whether simple funnels or larger press-style machines, gave families the ability to turn ground meat into links tailored to their own recipes. At the most basic, a metal funnel with a wide mouth and narrow spout was used. The casing, often made from cleaned animal intestines, was slipped over the spout, and seasoned meat was pushed through by hand or with a wooden plunger. Larger households or farms often owned press-style stuffers. These looked like small barrel-shaped devices with a crank or lever. Meat was loaded into the chamber, and as the crank turned, a piston forced the mixture smoothly into the casing. The process required teamwork, one person turning the crank while another carefully managed the casing to prevent it from splitting. For children, it was a fascinating, if slightly messy, sight. Watching long coils of sausage emerge and pile into trays felt almost magical. What made these tools valuable was the flexibility they offered. Recipes could be customized with spices, herbs, or fillers that reflected local traditions. German, Italian, and Eastern European immigrant families in America relied on stuffers to keep their culinary heritage alive, passing down recipes that demanded fresh, homemade sausages. Beyond flavor, it was also economical. Cuts of meat that might not work well in roasts or steaks could be blended into tasty fillings. The work could be slow, and the cleanup was not for the faint-hearted. Casings had to be rinsed and prepared, the equipment scrubbed thoroughly, and the meat handled with care to avoid waste. Yet the payoff was significant. Once stuffed, sausages could be smoked, dried, or frozen, ensuring a steady supply of hearty meals. 29th, hand crank ice cream freezer. Salt and ice churn. Before store-bought cartons filled supermarket freezers, making ice cream at home was an event in itself. The hand crank ice cream freezer turned dessert into a family activity, combining patience, muscle, and anticipation. These devices usually featured a wooden bucket lined with metal, a canister in the center to hold the cream mixture, and a hand crank attached to a set of paddles inside. Around the canister, crushed ice and rock salt were packed tightly, creating the freezing environment needed to transform liquid cream into a frozen treat. The process began with carefully preparing the base, cream, sugar, eggs, and flavorings like vanilla or fruit. Once poured into the canister, the real work started. Someone had to turn the crank steadily, forcing the paddles inside to scrape the sides and keep the mixture smooth as it froze. The longer it turned, the thicker and creamier the ice cream became. Families often took turns, children eager to help, but tiring quickly, handing the handle back to parents or older siblings. The sound of metal paddles grinding against ice became part of summer afternoons. Salt played a vital role, lowering the freezing point of the ice so the mixture could chill properly. It was a messy affair at times, with melting ice and salty water spilling over the edges of the bucket, but the reward was worth every bit of effort. When the lid was finally lifted, cold, freshly churned ice cream was scooped into bowls, often eaten right away before it melted. For many, that first spoonful carried the taste of celebration, marking birthdays, holidays, or simple gatherings on warm evenings. Homemade ice cream had a richness that store versions rarely matched. Families experimented with flavors, adding fruit from the garden or chocolate syrup from the pantry. Some even layered in nuts or crushed candy for texture. The freezer wasn't just a gadget, it was part of making memories. 30. Manual ice crusher, hand-turn bar tool. Cocktails, sodas, and fancy desserts once relied on a simple yet clever device, the manual ice crusher. Before refrigerators came with built-in dispensers and electric blenders took over, this small tool was a fixture in homes that enjoyed entertaining. Compact and sturdy, the crusher often clamped onto a countertop or sat on rubber feet, holding a small hopper where chunks of ice were placed. Turning the crank sent the blades inside to chop the ice into smaller pieces, which then fell into a container or bowl below. The sound was distinctive, a crunch and grind that echoed through the kitchen or bar area. For children, it was almost as exciting as the treats that followed, watching large cubes transform into sparkling chips. Crushed ice meant snow cones in summer, frosted lemonade, or even simple glasses of cola, made more refreshing with a layer of frost. Adults reached for it when preparing cocktails like mint juleps or daiquiris, where crushed ice made all the difference in texture and chill. The appeal of these crushers was not only in their function, but also in their design. Many had polished chrome exteriors or colorful enamel finishes that matched the decor of mid-century kitchens. Handles were smooth to grip, and some models even allowed you to choose between fine or coarse ice. They were small enough to store easily, yet durable enough to last for years. Of course, using them required effort. Cranking through a whole tray of ice cubes could leave your arm tired, and the blades occasionally jammed if a cube was too large. Still, the process became part of the fun, a little bit of work that paid off with cold drinks shared on porches and patios. When electric blenders and refrigerators with ice dispensers became common, the manual crusher gradually disappeared from daily life, yet vintage models remain popular among collectors and cocktail enthusiasts who appreciate their charm and practicality. For many, they bring back memories of summer evenings, sticky hands from melting ice, and the satisfying clink of a chilled glass filled to the brim